Hi there, and welcome to WhyBuy. In this special Legacy series, we're going to be taking a look at the Game Boy and its iterations, games, accessories, how they helped shape the modern handheld video game culture that exists today. In this multi-part series, we're going to be taking a look at a ton of great products. So stick around and let's start with part one, the Game Boy. So I think the best place to start is to discuss that the Nintendo Game Boy was really the first time you could ever play quality games handheld. It wasn't just about, having something on the go, but it was having something of quality on the go, whether that was side scrollers, games with better sound, graphics. This was really a revolutionary time in handheld gaming because you weren't bound to a television screen or an arcade anymore. This was something that could literally fit in your pocket and that you could play for hours on end no matter where you were. I think it's important to understand the era and the time people were living in. This was basically the first transition of video games from the arcade into the living room. But when Gunpei Yokoi was riding on a train and he saw adults trying to kill time by playing on a calculator, that's where the inspiration started for the Game Boy. And that idea would come to completely revolutionize the handheld video game market. What made the Game Boy so successful was the games. All you have to do is look at a title like Tetris. Simple in its design, easy to pick up and play, but it didn't matter what your skill level was, you could progress and continue to enjoy the game no matter how long you had been playing it. It's been a long time since the Game Boy's initial release, but you have to understand this was a big deal in terms of the design. Now, people refer to it as the brick because it looks like a brick, but I think what's important to note is that it still holds up today in terms of its form factor and ease to play. You have to think, there wasn't really anything like this to benchmark against at the time, and not only did it drop people's jaws when it released, but it's still fun to play today and it's still comfortable. And it really paved the way for a lot of handheld device technology. And just in the simple ease of access for its ports, whether it's charging or battery replacement, even the headphones to incorporate stereo sound if you wanted to plug in and have a better audio quality than just the built-in speaker in the device. Everything about the Game Boy at the time was revolutionary. Everything probably except the screen. Now, it doesn't really hold up well today, and you shouldn't really expect it to, considering it's been so long since its initial release. But even at the time, what was really attractive about the Game Boy wasn't its amazing screen, it was the games that was on it. But that lack in quality in the screen would be an opportunity for competitors to try and enter the marketplace. Nintendo had dominated the handheld console market, but there was something new, something that had not only a color screen, but backlighting. The Sega Game Gear. Now, the Sega Game Gear was something that no one really expected. And they came at Nintendo really aggressively. Here was another cartridge-based handheld system that offered something that Nintendo really couldn't. The fact that it had a colored screen where you could see just the beauty in the game design, especially in games like Sonic, or the fact that it was backlit and you didn't have to play in a lit room. You could play at night or not have to worry about angling the screen too much. But what really separated Sega, I think, from Nintendo is how aggressive they were with their marketing. Constantly attacking Nintendo being edgier and wittier with, you know, what their systems could offer that Nintendo couldn't. Really, this sparked a great rivalry between two totally different handheld consoles. And while the Sega offered, you know, technical features that the Game Boy didn't, I think a lot of people still gravitated towards Nintendo because the quality of the games mixed with the portability of the console, there was a lot of things that the Game Boy just did right. I think one of the standout features of, you know, the Game Boy over the Game Gear is that just how many batteries were required to power this thing. Yes, it was great having a backlit screen and color, but let's be real here, it was about portability and being able to take this with you on extended trips. No one wanted to pack a bunch of batteries and have this sucker juice through them in a couple hours. What I also think is interesting is that the introduction of the Game Gear, it sparked competition that really opened up the door for the accessories market on the Game Boy. Looking at the accessories for the Game Boy, I mean, you really have to look at this as what paved the way for, you know, what we see now in terms of iPhone accessories or even laptop accessories, anything that was portable. There was this whole market that supported it in terms of unique ways to express yourself or enhance the experience. And I think there's a lot of interesting, you know, quirky innovations that came for the Game Boy that, you know, some were really great. Having a Game Boy was being part of a culture. And that culture, you know, you couldn't just have a console. If you were a more serious gamer and, you know, you wanted to show off to your friends, you would have the ultimate accessory. I remember when my brother got the Handy Boy, and, you know, this was probably the equivalent of what would be like the Power Glove. Something that was just such a shock and awe. But really, I mean, in its practical application, it just was so ridiculous. But back in the day, this was something that when you saw it and someone had it, it's like, wow, like, I gotta step up my game, or there's no way I can throw down with this guy. I think when it comes down to it, out of all of the accessories, the light equipment, the magnification, nothing tops the Handy Boy with its stereo fold-out speakers and its magnification screen built in. You gotta wonder, oh, it's got light and it's got sound. How is it getting its power? And this is, you know, the innovation coming in. Look at this hot wiring jumper cables that's supposed to wire into the back of the Game Boy. There's no way this stuff was up to code. But it didn't matter if you were a gamer. This was like, oh, I'll figure it out. I got a soldering iron, I'll make this work. I only wish that I didn't lose the joystick click-on to enhance, you know, the D-pad and the buttons. Ridiculous. The Game Boy amplifier. Of course, you wanted that soundtrack blaring just a little bit louder, and why not? This was a great accessory because it didn't actually drain the batteries off of your Game Boy. It used its own separate power pack, so, you know, how cool is that? Still in the original packaging. Now, there are some accessories for the Game Boy that hold up better now than they did then. And this thing was an embarrassment. You didn't want to go to school or lug around this suitcase that looks like a Game Boy. I could totally see a marketing department being like, this is what people want. This is what the kids are gonna have everywhere. And it's a walking billboard for the Game Boy. And it wasn't cool at the time. You know, now looking back, if I can open the case, there we go. It is a really cool accessory to have. You know, you have your slots for your games. You could put your gaming accessories in here, your charger so that you didn't have to use your batteries. The Game Boy extra batteries, like looking back on all these accessories, especially stuff like this, I'm grateful that I have it because really it's a good physical representation of the demand and the popularity of the Game Boy at the time. Why else would they make stuff like this? It is really an amazing product that had tons of support because there was just tons of demand. Out of all the accessories for the Game Boy, the compact carrying case is probably my favorite. Aesthetically, I think they did the best work on it. It has beautiful stitching, places to put your games, belt loop on the back, Velcro top for the Game Boy. It was just something that really, I think just from a personal taste perspective, was a great contrast and just the accessory I wanted the most. I think if you look back over the handheld products Nintendo has released, what's interesting is that they were never really the best representation of the available technology at the time. It wasn't a specs flex. What it was a tested gameplay experience that was really good and available technology so that the price point of the device could be more accessible to gamers. One of the iterations that was stumbled upon was the Comboy. This is probably one of the more rare Game Boys that you'll ever see, the Hyundai Comboy Mini. And essentially what this is it's not just a silkscreen rebranding, it's really a way to penetrate into a market where, due to conflict, the Game Boy wasn't actually sold, and that was in South Korea. So by total fluke, this was bought, and it actually turns out it's a really rare and significant find. So, you know, for your enjoyment, here's some footage of it, and yeah, it's just kind of a, you know, a happy accident. One of the best competitive advantages that Game Boy had was the Super Game Boy. Now, if you had a Super Nintendo and the cartridge adapter, you could actually take your Game Boy games and play them on a television. But it wasn't just playing a Game Boy game on TV. You had added artwork on the side banners to fill the gaps in the screen, and you had access to new color palettes to colorize the games to play them in ways you hadn't seen before. So although the Game Boy was dominating the handheld market, they still had stiff competition. You have to remember that the Sega Game Gear still offered a backlit screen, and they also offered color. Now, while the Play It Loud campaign offered Game Boys in a colored format, the Game Boy Pocket was really the last marketing attempt to try and compete with the other handhelds at the time. You had a bit improved screen, the form factor was smaller, but it really wasn't a dramatic enough jump to a color screen or a backlit screen to compete with, say, the Sega Game Gear. So as a consumer, as a gamer, was this it? Was this going to be the last attempt at Game Boy competing? So let's take a look at Mega Man. For those of you who are wondering if whether or not these games hold up, well, take a look at the Mega Man series. Not only is it extremely responsive and difficult, but the soundtrack is fantastic. The actual gameplay is really challenging, and it's not challenging in that the controls and the response of the game is laggy or it doesn't have you know, that kind of intuitive control scheme. You know, the challenge is really in the level design and the characters. It's a great series that still holds up today, and I can only imagine at the time when it released, you know, what people must have thought, like, wow, this is incredible. Let's take a look at Ninja Turtles: Fall of the Foot Clan. So what I love about Ninja Turtles is that at the time, this was really the Paw Patrol of our generation. This was something that, it was a cultural phenomenon, not just with the comic books, but the cartoons, the toys, and to finally be able to play a handheld console with the Ninja Turtles and being able to select your character, which one, you know, who's your favorite. It was just a great experience, and it holds up well. I mean, the controls feel tight and responsive. It's an awesome game. If you're looking to try out one of the games from the Ninja Turtle series, the third one, Radical Rescue, is the one you want to go for. Solar Striker. Now, what's really cool about this game is the fact that you could really just turn it on and start playing. It is a true-to-form, arcade, fun shooter. What's great about Solar Striker is that really, I think for almost anyone picking up a Game Boy game, this would be the easiest to switch on and start playing and having a blast. With Solar Striker, what Tetris is to puzzles, Solar Striker is to arcade games. Pac-Man. I mean, what more can you say about Pac-Man? It's iconic, it's a remake, and this feels like the arcade game. This is awesome. Ah, Mortal Kombat. Talk about a letdown. Now, in the 90s, Mortal Kombat was awesome. The film, the game, I mean, the Mortal Kombat game on the SNES and the Sega, it changed a lot of things in the gaming industry. And when we heard that this was going to be available on the Game Boy and that we could find, I mean, I think everyone collectively held their breath to finally be able to have Mortal Kombat in the privacy of your own handheld. And then you turned it on and it sucked. It was laggy. The controls felt just stuck. You thought your Game Boy was broken. And it just, graphically, it just didn't hold up very well. But I remember when I was playing as a kid, you kind of just, you're in denial. You lie to yourself like, no, this is as good. This is as good. Yoshi. Now, if you're not overly familiar with the Game Boy, this isn't like the modern iterations of Yoshi. This is actually more akin to a game like Tetris. It's like a puzzle game. You know, if you're into this sort of thing, it's actually quite a bit of fun. And I think this was the first time you saw Yoshi on the Game Boy. So what Yoshi does well is the same as what Tetris did well. It's basic in its graphics, but the gameplay is highly addictive. Blades of Steel. To be able to play hockey like this from what really, you know, felt like a at-home console, it was interesting. It was challenging because it doesn't necessarily hold up well, but it was cool. You could play just regular games, and you could even challenge people in fights. It was kind of weird. However, unless you grew up with the franchise, I don't know if you want to check it out. Wheel of Fortune. You know, maybe if you're a fan of the show, you'd like to have this, but some games look better on the shelf. F1. Now, this was a game that I think everybody had, and that was probably due to the fact that if you had a multi-link cable, yeah, it was a game that you could play with your friends and have multiplayer. I don't remember anyone ever playing it. I think it's kind of fun, you know, to have a three-dimensional space to be driving through, you know, not a top-down experience. I don't know, it was, you know, I think at the time it might have been a graphical flex, but yeah, I don't know if it's held up all that well. It's okay. So for all the innovation and work that went into the 4-player experience with the Game Boy, there was really only 3 games that could utilize it. F1 Race, Wave Race, and Top Rank Tennis. If there was more, I don't think anyone cares. Donkey Kong. Now, if there are a few games that really stand out on the Game Boy, this is one of them. From the start of the title screen, just like the arcade, you're transported into probably one of the most addicting and fun gameplay experiences of any platformer. If you're thinking about getting a Game Boy or you're looking at games that you don't have, highly recommend this one. Here's another classic, Paperboy. Now, on NES, this was probably the first time you felt like you were in an RPG or like a world, and you probably thought it was the greatest thing ever. But like a lot of games on the Game Boy, there were ports, and the experience is... So the objective's pretty straightforward. You're delivering papers, but on a smaller screen size and with the different gameplay experience, it isn't really quite as fun as what I remember on console. But don't worry, they made a second one. And the second one might be worse. Awesome, Double Dragon. One of the best games that was on the NES was Double Dragon, so when they announced that it was coming to the Game Boy, that was pretty exciting. The problem, like a lot of these classic NES titles that were ported over to the Game Boy, it just wasn't quite the same experience. But I think for most of us, you know, you kind of just did the squint and like, yeah, it's good enough, because while it might not have been the same thing as playing it on console, it was still pretty cool that you could actually still have this in your pocket and play it wherever you wanted to. For portable beat-em-up games, Double Dragon, yeah, it does the trick. It's better than Mortal Kombat. Now, it's probably time to talk about one of the most important series on the Game Boy, and that's Super Mario Land. Now, the original game, this was really the first time you had that experience of playing a console game on a handheld. Now, it might not have been identical, albeit developed by a different team. The feel was still there, the responsiveness of a Mario game, the soundtrack for a Mario game, the characters. It really did feel like a quality experience on a handheld. And for me, I mean, this was a really special game that it made the Game Boy feel like it was something that you should have and you could play as a standalone, even if you didn't have a console. So, Super Mario Land was really a great achievement for the Game Boy. But if your expectations were satisfied with Super Mario Land, you had no idea what was coming with 6 golden coins. See, Super Mario Land, 6 golden coins, I mean, it didn't even feel like a direct continuation from Super Mario Land. It was an entirely different experience. The character designs were much more detailed. You had an entire world to explore with, I mean, just the soundtrack alone of this game. If you had to pick a game to take with you and it was the only game you'd have left, the Desert Island game, I mean, it might be the ultimate Game Boy game for me. There were secrets, there were boss fights, there were, I mean, just a host of characters and diverse level design that really, I can't imagine there being a more fun game to keep playing even to this day after sinking so many hours, days into this game. Super Mario Land 2, 6 Golden Coins is in so many ways a perfect game. But I really wish they did a DX version like Link's Awakening so that we could have it in color. You could even throw in a Luigi in there. So Super Mario Land 3 or Wario Land. So Wario Land, I think, was an interesting sequel in the franchise because the expectation was so high after Super Mario Land 2, 6 Golden Coins that a lot of people might have thought this was a letdown, but that would probably just be on the surface. If you look at what Wario Land does well, there's so much to offer here, and it's with an entirely new character that really it's its own story. And I think over time you start to fall in love with the different character designs, and you want to play this title even more because it has the same qualities of a Super Mario Land 2, but it's a new world, it's new characters to experience, different gameplay modes. I mean, just the ability to have that same quality, but in a new universe, probably ended up being the most played title in my collection. Another thing too to point out is that this is the debut of the character Wario. And you have to remember at the time, Nintendo was probably so skeptical and worried about launching this new character that they attributed the Super Mario Land title in this game, even though Mario's not even in it. But look how successful the franchise came to be, spawning 2 sequels after this on the handhelds, and it being one of the more known characters in the Nintendo universe. It's a special game. It's something unique to have, and really, you can see just how much care and attention to detail they put into this franchise, just in this game alone. Jurassic Park. Now, surprisingly, this game is actually a really good RPG. While you could really get into the story, the biggest problem that it had was the fact that there was no save states. So you'd be sitting down for a long time trying to beat this game. So while Jurassic Park was a great RPG for the Game Boy, without save states, it was brutal. You had to sit for so long to make any progress, and had I known then, what I know now is there's a cheat code that you can press start and select and pick the level that you want to jump to. So that's Jurassic Park, and they actually made it part 2. And Jurassic Park Part 2 is actually an entirely different game. Rather than it being a top-down view of the character, it's a side-scroller. And in my opinion, it's way more fun to play, and if you really want to, you can still enter a cheat code and jump levels. So while Jurassic Park 2 is actually not a top-down view of the character, it's a side-scroller, you could also enter a cheat code to jump levels, just like Contra, and it made the games a lot more playable considering that they just didn't have save states, and it'd be really frustrating if you didn't have the time to sit down and play through the whole game. So things I wish I would have known then, but you know, we only have Google now, so yeah. Speedy Gonzales. Now, I think what's great about this game is that it gave an alternative to playing Sonic the Hedgehog. So the fact that you could have a side-scroller running type game that, you know, instead of jumping on enemies, you're trying to avoid them and try and get through the level as fast as you can. Another thing too, the sound effects for this game were utilized in a lot of other Game Boy games. You might even hear it throughout, you know, as you're playing different games. Like, I think that sound was from Speedy Gonzales. Gargoyle's Quest. So what's interesting about Gargoyle's Quest is that, you know, while I didn't have it growing up, it is a good game, but the way it was marketed was, you know, that it had graphics so real you'll forget it's a game. And I mean, let's be real here. This is on the Game Boy. I mean, it's not that realistic. So if you know Bomberman, you know Bomberman. And Bomberman GB was a really cool game. I mean, his little character's got the Indiana Jones hat. Of the Bomberman games that were available on the Game Boy, this one was really great. It had clean graphics, good level design. Just a great game to have. So while Bomberman GB was a classic Bomberman game, there was a follow-up that a lot of you might not know called Pocket Bomberman. And unlike the traditional sense, this was a really responsive and fun side-scrolling game that still used the same characters but had really different gameplay, and it's just kind of a hidden gem that you might want to check out if you haven't. Metroid 2, Return of Samus. If you know Nintendo, you know that they love Metroid, and if you love Nintendo, chances are you love Metroid. And this was a really heavily marketed franchise that, you know, to this day, Samus is included in a ton of Nintendo games, and to have it on a handheld console was pretty cool. It was really an interesting character, and what, I mean, some of you might know, might not know, is that the character Samus is actually female. Kirby's Dreamland. Now, this game was probably the biggest standout of what didn't feel like a console port onto a handheld, but more of a polished and fun experience. This is probably the game that I put in the most time playing because the soundtrack was fantastic, the character designs were great, and really the gameplay was a lot of fun. This was probably the game that if I had to pick something that I wanted to pick up and play right away, it'd be Kirby's Dreamland, because it still plays so well. So if there's any drawback to Kirby's Dreamland, is that it was short. It was a great game and you didn't want to put it down, but you could finish it relatively quickly, and it wasn't until later, until I grew out of gaming, that I came back to it and realized that they made a Kirby's Dreamland 2. So Kirby's Dreamland 2 was not only the same as Kirby's Dreamland in all the right ways, but it just improved on the formula by adding save states, power-ups, new characters. It was a great continuation of the series, and you know, like a lot of people, I didn't even know that they made a Kirby's Dreamland 2, and this game is fantastic. So if you're a fan of Kirby's Dreamland, there's a game you probably didn't hear about. And that's Trip World. Arguably one of the greatest hidden gems on the Game Boy. Trip World is not only a terrific game, but it's just chocked full of amazing soundtracks, characters, and the gameplay is just so much fun. And because it's such a rare game, I don't know if my copies are legitimate, but I'm just happy that I'm able to play this because I didn't even know this existed up until recently, and it's a really good game. In fact, this is something that, like Kirby's, I think should be in your collection of Game Boy games. So if you're a Nintendo fan, the name Contra is synonymous with the brand. It is one of those standout franchises that really, when you think about it coming to the Game Boy, you kind of have to hold your breath. Did they succeed in pulling off a true Contra game on a handheld? And they did. Playing this game now, it still feels like a Contra game. What's great about Contra is that it's a good example of how you don't have to compromise playing a Game Boy version of a game. It can be its own thing, but still have those qualities of what made the console version so popular. Batman. I think what's great about Batman is that when you think about games that are based on movies, or anytime they take an iconic character and put it in video game form, they tend to disappoint. But on Game Boy, Batman was responsive and fun. It was what you'd come to expect from a Game Boy game. I think a lot of games like this, we've come to expect that they're just money grabs. But this one isn't the case. It's actually a rare exception that I think got overlooked because, well, similar to the SNES version of Batman, you know, it just felt kind of like a letdown. But this is a game that, you know, if you really enjoyed Super Mario Land, you'd really like this game. Dr. Mario. Now, similar to Tetris, Dr. Mario is actually a very faithful port to the NES. And it's just a really great game to have when, you know, your budget's limited and you can't have a lot of games. This is probably one of the ones that was in your collection. It was just a really fun game, easy to play, easy to pick up, and, you know, progressive in terms of its difficulty. You could really, whether you're a beginner or you've played it a lot, you know, it's still fun. Battletoads. Now, if there's one thing I remember about Battletoads, is that it's relentlessly difficult. If you remember, just playing through the first level, if you could make it to the bike, and you could get past the stages, how fast everything came by on screen, I can't remember how many times I just got stuck and basically ripped the game out of the Game Boy, because it's a really good beat 'em up game, and it's unapologetic in terms of, you know, how good it thinks you are as a gamer. It's a fun game. It's Battletoads, I think, is, you know, what you would expect if you wanted to get Ninja Turtles, or if you wanted to get a fun side-scroller beat 'em up that really, it was just kind of unexpected. The artwork was really cool. It was just kind of this original IP that it was a welcome surprise. If you got it and played it for the first time, you were kind of just blown away at just how much fun this game really is. The Battletoads franchise was really kind of in a league of its own, and not so much because of the character design and the gameplay, but just some of the material and some of the story elements were kind of raunchy, and there was a lot of innuendo that you wouldn't expect to see, you know, in a kid's game, or, you know, let alone on Nintendo. So looking at another awesome franchise, Castlevania. Now, Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge is probably the standout title for me, because not only did they improve on the gameplay from Castlevania Adventure, but Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge has probably my favorite soundtrack in the Game Boy library, and it's an awesome game. When you're playing through this, the only thing that I would say is the downside is that, again, there's no save states. Like a lot of these games, It's just brutal if you have to get sent back to the start. And thankfully now, thanks to the internet, we have cheat codes that you can look up, and it makes the game more playable. And you know, it's one of the things you'll notice playing these older games is that they're incredibly difficult, you know, juxtaposed to newer games now where you have respawns, and it's just, it's better at keeping you engaged in the game. These are, they'll punish you if you're not on your toes. And anyways, that's what made them so much fun, is that you had great gameplay, a great soundtrack, and even if you got sent back to the beginning, it's worth it to go through again. Zelda, Link's Awakening. Now, if I have to explain to you why this game is what it is, you're probably watching the wrong video. But something that you might not know is that this game was a side project. And what it ended up turning out to be was maybe the best game in the entire franchise. And you can see that in the re-release that came out on the Switch. A lot of people refer to this game as their favorite Zelda game, and I think it was just unexpected at the time. It was something that, from its opening title sequence, the music, the cinematic, it just felt like something very special and unique. And you could arguably say it inspired the creation of a lot of other games, because you had RPG elements, you had action elements, and it had kind of everything that you hoped you'd find in a Game Boy game, or a Nintendo game for that matter. Great soundtrack, great gameplay, awesome level design, and an interesting story and characters. Unlike some of the other standout titles on the Game Boy, this one got a colorized version later on the Game Boy Color. It's just one of the overall great franchises Nintendo has to offer. If you're familiar at all with Nintendo, you've heard of Zelda. So another game that you might not know about, but is an absolute unsung hero for the Game Boy, is Mole Mania. Now, this game was created by Shigeru Miyamoto, and it arguably is one of the best games on the platform. So if you're a huge fan of, say, like Donkey Kong, Link's Awakening, sometimes you want to go back through the creator's library to see other work that they did, and this game is a perfect example of something that you might stumble across that really embodies all the great characteristics of what made his game so special, and it's just a lot of fun to play. And you know, it's fun to discover something new and that you just accidentally overlooked because you didn't know. Mole Mania is 100% worth checking out if you don't own it already. So I think when you look at the whole point of the handheld video game market, you know, as gamers, a lot of the time we're just killing time, and when it comes down to the best game for anyone to pick up and try or become the master of, well, what more can you say? Tetris is the best example of something that's accessible, it's fun to play, it's addictive, it's something that appealed to everyone, and not just kids. This was something that, you know, was marketed towards adults as well. It was a challenging game. It was something that everyone could play, and people could challenge each other. This was, I mean, I have a lot of good memories of setting up a link cable and playing against friends with a Game Boy that, you know, Tetris was something that even if you didn't game, you could pick up and jump in and have fun. It's something that is, you know, been covered by a lot of people and in terms of a historic landmark in gaming culture, and probably one of the best moves Nintendo could have made when launching the Game Boy with a pack-in title. Putting in Super Mario Land would have been great for kids, but putting in Tetris would have been great for everyone, and that's, you know, why they did it in North America and it became such a cultural phenomenon. Tetris really represents what is so great about the Game Boy. It's something that anyone could pick up and not know anything about how to play it or what to do, but they're immediately hooked and they just don't want to give it back. So when the Game Boy Color was released, it was really one of those moments of, did they just do that? Was that the big improvement from the original Game Boy? Because at the time, you have to understand that backlighting wasn't uncommon. I mean, even during the Game Boy's production, you had the Sega Game Gear that had backlighting. So why is it that when they announced the next generation of the Game Boy, they didn't include backlighting? Now, a lot of people might speculate that in order to help developers making games for the Game Boy have kind of an extension on that with the Game Boy Color, and while simultaneously working with other developers on a secret project, which then we came to know as the Game Boy Advance, this was kind of a stopgap. This was something that, you know, would appease the market in terms of the demand for a color screen, but it still followed that kind of Game Boy, you know, production methodology where you take existing older technologies that are well proven and bake them into something that's reliable and low cost to produce. Either way, it was very effective because the Game Boy Color dominated the handheld market again, but you could almost argue that that was due to the success of Pokemon. But the Game Boy Color wasn't devoid of innovation. There was other things that we saw for the first time on a handheld. Now, while at the time you had cell phones back then didn't have cameras. And the Game Boy Color had the Game Boy camera that you could slide in and take photos with. And with the printer accessory, print off those photos. Now, the photos weren't of any good quality, but it was still pretty cool to be able to have a handheld device that could take photographs. And more importantly, you had an infrared sensor at the top where the power switch used to be. This would allow you to really, for wireless connectivity for the first time in a handheld, trade information. Like in the Pokemon franchise, if you wanted to trade Pokemon that you captured with another player, that's how you did it. And it was pretty cool at the time, but again, it's kind of glossed over now because a lot of these technologies are commonplace. But in the era of the Game Boy Color, you know, maybe it's one of the things that helped it stand out and dominate the market yet again. I think what really helped the Game Boy Color stand out is that you could finally play an NES game on a handheld. And Super Mario Bros. Deluxe was probably one of the most popular games on the NES console, but when ported over to the Game Boy Color, there was one glaring issue, and that was the crop on the screen. If you don't remember, Super Mario Bros. On the NES was a pretty challenging game, but when the screen was cropped, you were really put at a disadvantage because you couldn't see if there was a pit to fall into or an enemy coming. There was really a large portion of the screen that was left off the table. And when you look at it compared to the console version or even the Game Boy Advance version, you could really see how when you're playing this, you'd be at a huge disadvantage. If there was a redeeming quality to playing it on the Game Boy, it's that you had save states. So, you know, if you did lose your progress to an unfair advantage of a crop screen, at least it would save and you wouldn't lose all your progress when the game was over. One of the things that you saw in the Game Boy Color was the re-release of older games from the Game Boy, but now in a DX version so that you could play them in color. And what was cool about these games is that you could actually play these on the Game Boy or on the Game Boy Color. And if you played it on the Game Boy Color, you would get a colorized version of the game, and in some cases, you actually got a little bit of extra content, which, you know, made picking up a new copy worth it. In some ways, you could look at this as a cash grab, but I think it was nice to see that you had a reason to revisit these titles and play them with a faster processor, better graphics, and a colorized screen. So with the Game Boy Color falling short of expectations, I think all of us were filled with anticipation that the next iteration of the Game Boy is going to be a leap in performance, and it's going to have that backlit screen. Well, it was a leap in performance, but still no backlit screen. And much to my surprise, the form factor changed completely. Now, a lot of people, this is subjective, whether or not you like this over the traditional where the screen is on top. But I think we can agree that for the sweet spot in finding the screen, especially not being backlit, it was a lot harder to do when it was shaped like a controller. And I know a lot of people would argue that, well, the Game Boy Advance is just, it's better designed to hold in your hands, but what I find is that it's constantly slipping out of my grip. There's just nothing below that I can use these fingers for. And again, it's subjective, it depends on your play style, but I mean, in the next episode, you'll see I modded 2 of these Game Boy Advance thinking that that would be the ultimate handheld console, and it just, still after playing it for hours, going back and forth, I wouldn't put this at the top of my list. So another thing to point out with the Game Boy Advance is that the buttons actually changed. How they feel, their tactile response. I almost prefer playing these reissued games on the Game Boy Advance because it just feels more snappier, more responsive. And I think the only gripe that I have really about the button layout is the start and select being on the left-hand side. I always constantly try and find it below the screen, but it's just, again, it takes some getting used to. But the point here is that, you know, the buttons just felt more responsive. And even in the Game Boy Advance SP, you didn't have the same buttons on there, and you can notice a difference. I mean, it's minor, but I certainly prefer it on the Advance. One of the most important things that the Game Boy Advance did was backwards compatibility. Now, when you think about gaming consoles and parents who are just frustrated when a new console comes out because, oh great, now I have to buy a new system, I have to buy new games, nothing from before works now. It really was, I think, an advantage that the Game Boy Advance had. Not only could you play your game library from the Game Boy Color, but it would colorize the games as well, which just added more value. It's something that I think makes the Game Boy what it is that it really does give gamers what they want, and that's to be able to play, you know, their entire gaming library, even if it spans different generations of console. So with the Game Boy Advance still being a great handheld console, but a disappointment in the screen, this is where the Game Boy Advance SP did a lot of things right, but still wrong. So here we are again, the new release of a Game Boy, and it's gonna have a lit up screen, but it's edge-lit. Another example of using old technology in a new hardware release, but we didn't care. Now we could finally plug in our headphones, have an illuminated display, and get gaming. But wait, they got rid of the headphone jack. So if you think Apple was the first one to cash in on the dongle craze, think again. So looking back on the Game Boy Advance SP, yeah, we were very excited that we had a lit up display and a new form factor, but we didn't know at the time that they actually came out with a different variation with a much better screen that was actually backlit. And we're not just talking about a small difference here. The color, how you can see the screen, there's a massive difference in gameplay quality. And if you're looking for these now and wondering, well, how do I determine between the two? The easiest way is to look on the serial number on the back. You can actually see on the original, it says AGS 001. But the better screen, you want to look for the AGS 101. And it makes a huge difference, believe me. And another thing, The Game Boy Advance SP finally had a built-in rechargeable battery. No longer did you have to hunt for the TV remote or try and steal some Duracells out of the drawer and to power your console. You finally had a way just to plug in and let your battery charge. And all these years later, as a grab-and-go device, I still don't have to worry about charging this thing. It still holds a relatively good charge, and it just is a testament to the build quality of Nintendo. So an honorable mention is the Game Boy Micro. Now, while it could be looked at as kind of just a cash grab and a bit of a failure, it wasn't backwards compatible, it was really awkward to have, I wouldn't say it's worth going out and getting one, but you know, it's kind of a significant moment that marked the end of the Game Boy. So looking at some of the games on the Game Boy Advance, you really started to see Super Nintendo games come across to the handheld. Now, while they weren't identical, it'd be hard to distinguish. I mean, in Super Mario World 2 or Super Mario World Super Mario Advance 2, you had, you know, a bit different mixing on the soundtrack, the color was a little bit different, but in terms of the secrets and the full game, this is what really attracted an older audience to the console. I don't know who was behind this at Nintendo, but it's so confusing. Rather than just saying Super Mario on the Game Boy Advance, they went Super Mario Advance. Makes sense, tie in the Advance title. But then they went Super Mario World, Super Mario Advance 2. And then for Super Mario 3, they went Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Bros. 3. And while there were a ton of great games on the Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Advanced SP systems, really the only ones that stood out for me were the Super Nintendo ports. So every now and again, what I love about Nintendo is that they release something that scratches that nostalgia itch. Now, this came in the form of a Game Boy Advance that was NES themed, but in doing so, they also released NES titles on the appropriate gray cartridge with the black label and also in the black box. This was something that, you know, I think they know that their core fan base just wants, and it was really cool to see this library, this lineup of great games now available, you know, for some retro gaming on this new handheld. So with the Game Boy Advanced SP and the AGS 101 finally being what everyone wanted, a properly backlit, full color array, great form factor, huge library and backwards compatibility, you're kind of left wondering, well, what's left? And I think that's what, for various reasons, this might be one of them, sparked the desire to start modifying the originals. Because I think the form factor of the original was great, and people started wondering, well, could we get performance and displays like this into something like this? So in this day and age, you have your Xbox Series X, your PlayStation 5, and sometimes you just feel like you want to play those old games. And that's where I think, looking back at the Game Boy, a lot of people felt the same way. They wanted to dig out those old boxes where they were stored away, dust off the original Game Boy, and start to play it. But what you realize really quickly is that the experience kind of sucks. Originally, I was just looking at, well, how do I fix the original display from these lines that happen across the screen that, you know, can really just ruin the experience of playing these classic games. Now, if you keep going down that rabbit hole, you start to find guys who are taking this original hardware and adding backlighting to it. This original Game Boy with this mod was really the birth of modding Game Boys. Backlighting the screen is really trying to replace the source of light that it currently has. So by removing the screen and kind of tinkering in there really tight because you can't disconnect it, you have to peel away that reflective film and allow for the backlight to come through. But with a bivert, you can actually get a reversed contrast so that not only was it backlighting the screen, but it gave you much sharper detail and really the first original Game Boy with a backlit screen. In essence, this was kind of the first explosion in popularity for modding the original Game Boy, because one thing is fixing the screen if it was damaged, but another thing was having that original screen and those original games with backlighting. And it really is just kind of the beginning of what the modding community has done to take these to the next level. So I think when you start to look into the modding community, it's important to mention kind of the knockoff Game Boys that were out there. Specifically with the GB Boy, this was actually a pretty good hardware clone where not only could you play the original games, but it also came packed in with, it says, 66 games in one. Surprisingly, the D-pad felt good, the buttons felt good. The only real knock on it was the fact that the screen aspect ratio wasn't native to the Game Boy, so it was always just a bit stretched. But really, at the time when I looked into these, are like $13, it was a really good deal to have a color backlit display to play Game Boys on. A real cheap alternative to doing mods yourself. For all of the GB Boy's flaws, it seems to have increased in value and actually gone up in price. So for whatever reason. Now, you have to understand that at the time, when emulation wasn't really that big, aside from cramming a Raspberry Pi into an original Game Boy and drilling some holes, which was a complicated mod, the BitBoy kind of solved that with just being able to buy a finished device that was built in and was just easy to just pick up and go. So while you might be interested in an emulator, I still think there's something off about it. It doesn't quite feel like the original gameplay, and that's probably due to the fact that it's a software clone and it's not actual hardware. But if you're interested in emulators, maybe it's something to check out so that you can browse some of the games and, you know, get a feel for what the originals were like, more or less. The mod that attracted me and made the most sense to do because it was easy and totally worth it was putting an AGS 101 screen into an original Game Boy Advance. Now, the benefit of this is, like I said, the installation is relatively simple, and what was great about it is that you could really put what was the best available screen for the Game Boy into an original Game Boy Advance, which never had backlighting. And over time, you know, what we now know as the IPS screens, when those became available, you had a much brighter and more vivid screen, which is kind of the gold standard now. And you can see the differences in between this kind of Super Famicom themed version versus this Super Nintendo version. The difference between the two is really noticeable, and that's why so many people use these IPS screens, because they look so good. So really coming back full circle, the IPS screen mod was the best possible way to take an original Game Boy and give it the best screen. And really, it makes playing the original games on the original form factor the most satisfying. So if you're worried about doing this modification to your original Game Boy and you don't want to compromise its integrity, its original state, you can always buy cheap shells to do this modification, and it really does require very minimal cutting anyways. So I'll leave it to you if maybe you have an old Game Boy that, you know, isn't really worth playing anymore, the screen is toast, it might be worth doing this, but if you're unsure, then yeah, just buy kind of a cheap shell and do the modification anyways. Just to give a shout out to a few places that have been great to deal with: retrogaming.com, handheldlegend.com, and funnyplaying.com. If you're looking to get into modding, or if you're already in the modding community, these are some places worth checking out. And for really high-end quality work, Boxy Pixel is by far doing the best craftsmanship, and you have to check them out. Now, when we look at Game Boy, Advanced, SP, the mods you could do, in 2022, if you're wondering what the best possible way to experience these games are, it's on the Analogue Pocket. So being in the modding community, looking on posts on social media, you occasionally come across stuff from Analogue. Well, Analogue was this company that really was focused on taking a hardware clone so that it could play the games as they were originally intended, glitches and all. So to give you a good example of why these hardware emulations were so important is that when you think about playing old games, even on, let's say, like a CRT television, there was something about playing what the console was designed to be played on in that original form. It felt right, it felt proper. And when you think about the handheld market and these games, well, I wish I could play those original games with a higher resolution, beautiful screen, but still have those original quirks and that sharpness and responsiveness. Well, that's exactly what they accomplished. The big difference between software emulation and hardware emulation is the analog feel. So when you think about playing the original games, when you play them on an emulator, well, because it's software emulation, it isn't quite exact. It's not what it was in its original state. Now, whether you notice it or not, it is there and it doesn't feel as good. But when you have a hardware emulation that is as accurate as what Analogue has done here, it does feel like if you played back to back the original Game Boy and the Analogue Pocket, the gameplay experience would be the same. In fact, really, what is a glaring difference is the beautiful display and how you have this more modern take on the Game Boy. What's interesting about the Analogue Pocket is that they chose to use the aspect ratio from the original dot matrix DMG Game Boy. And that was because they knew that the hardcore fan base that was looking to buy this shape, this Analogue Pocket, was going to be playing original Game Boys in this aspect ratio. So that if you're playing Game Boy Advance games, that would have those black bars, not the original content. So when I look at the Analogue Pocket, I think, okay, why does this feel so good? And when you compare it to the original, you can see just how the button feel is not only like the original, but it's improved and it has better responses. Aesthetically, looking at the Analogue Pocket, it really is a one-to-one comparison to the original Game Boy. And what's even better about that is that it's really well thought out in terms of the button placement. Now, you could argue that the back of the design is somewhat compromised for where you place cartridges, but if I even just take this ROM cartridge and place it in the back, your fingers rest perfectly comfortable. And there's no risk of you actually bumping the cartridge out. And I've heard some people talk about that, and you know, I guess depending on your play style, maybe that'll happen. But where they rest on the shoulder buttons, it's perfectly comfortable. And let's be real here, I mean, if a lot of you end up putting a ROM into this, you know, all-in-one device, you really don't have to worry about cartridges sliding out. I think the rationale of designing it this way is, you know, with the adapters that you can put on afterwards. Now, I don't have a Sega Game Gear adapter to play those games in yet, because ordering this thing, if you don't know, it's brutal to actually get your hands on one is so difficult. And buying this one, you know, it was really a matter of fluke, hearing that the sales went live, jumping online and ordering this and the dock for it. That's really, I mean, who knows, maybe if I had spent time looking for the adapters, I would have lost my queue and not been able to order this. So really, again, the whole point of the Analogue Pocket is to have a true to form Game Boy experience with a very beautiful and modern display. So when you look at the actual performance of the Analogue Pocket, they included two, not one, two FPGA chips. Now, one to play all the games and everything that we love, but the other, there's a whole nother scene for the Analogue Pocket, and that's music, chip tuning. This is something that could, you know, power your creation of interesting chip tune sounds, but I'm not even gonna go there. It's a demo that I would probably botch, so just know that this is a device that, you know, at a glance, you might not notice, but there's a lot more going on here. For example, just on the front of the device, why did they put 4 buttons instead of 2? If it's designed to play, let's say, Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games, none of those games require more than 2 buttons on the face of the device. So who knows? I'm looking forward really to what this thing can do once some of the modding community gets their hands on it and really kind of unlocks its potential. I think at a glance, there's a lot to pick apart here in terms of the aesthetics, the actual interactions with the ports, but what's important to focus on here with the Analogue Pocket is that really this is the best possible display to be playing Game Boy games on. And what's more interesting is that the software that's coming for this is going to enable the gaming community to develop their own games for the system. So while I love playing the original titles on this Analogue Pocket, I'm curious to see what the development community comes up with. Now, if you're curious as to that, just go to Analogue's website and look for GB Studio. Maybe you'll come up with something cool and we'll be able to play it. In terms of the quality of the experience, I don't think there's any comparison. The Analogue Pocket really is the peak of what you can experience, especially playing these original games. Even the modded Game Boys with an IPS screen doesn't do justice to how good this looks and how good it sounds. If there's one thing I'll say is that the camera does not do it justice when I'm filming it. I'm trying my best to showcase the differences here, but in person, the color depth, the actual response time, it's so nice to play all of these games on the Analogue Pocket. So if you're watching this present day and you're wondering, well, how much does the Analogue Pocket cost? Well, it's $220, which, if you think about it, is really a bargain because the modding community isn't what it was just even a couple years ago. Getting into modding original Game Boys and just the time and the money that you're going to put into it, if you're just looking to play the games in the highest quality experience, the Analogue Pocket's the way to go. It's basically a ready-to-run machine that you don't have to do anything for. So really, the Analogue Pocket is kind of bittersweet. It's the end of the chase of trying to mod and have the perfect Game Boy. So in a lot of ways, this kind of concludes the chase for the Game Boy and reliving all that experience. In fact, it's not even so much about nostalgia as it is invigorating all of these old games that were great to play originally, but maybe the hardware was compromised and, you know, felt a little deflated. The Analogue Pocket is injecting life into something that, you know, is really a timeless classic of console. It's not just about building you know, something to play all the original games on in its highest quality possible, they're kind of sparking a whole new culture for developers to be able to contribute to the platform. I think there are a lot of people who remember all of these old games and maybe they have ideas and things they want to share that now a platform exists that you can develop for. It's not always easy getting onto one of the big PlayStation, Nintendo, Microsoft consoles, and to have something that's accessible for the community. I really like what Analogue is doing here in just, it's not even so much breathing new life into the product, it's creating something kind of new. I'm trying to find things to criticize about the Analogue Pocket, and I think I found one. So for most games, a hard reset is A, B, start, select. But the way the Analogue Pocket is designed with the home button in the center between start and select, you can't do that. And I'm so used to playing games and being able to just, you know, hard reset that it really gets annoying that I can't do that. So one of the cool features while playing the Analogue Pocket is the fact that if you want to, you can just be in the middle of a game, put the device to sleep, and return to it later right where you left off. It's something that you might find with ROM cartridges. You can't do that yet, and it might be fixed in a later software patch. But even for the original games, there's a lot of games where you would have had to drain your battery, leaving it on a pause screen, whereas this, you can be playing it, come back to it later, and just pick up right where you left off. It's just something small, but it makes it more fun. Another thing that the Analogue Pocket allows you to do is save states within any game. You have to think about the save state feature as almost something that we never had in the original Game Boy. If you think about just how many games you tried to make it far, but you had to sit through an entire playthrough, and if you died, if the game was over, you had to start all the way back from the beginning. This now gives you an opportunity to try different tactics and techniques, and if you die, go right back to the point where you saved, try it again. It opens up the door for a lot of games that you might have just ripped out and thrown out the window out of frustration. So to my gripe earlier, which is really minor with the A, B, start, select, reset, there's really no need for it anymore if you have a save state. You're essentially doing the same thing, but it's more convenient and it's more useful. So, you know, while I admit you want to have that original experience, but there's some things that I would do without, and the Analogue Pocket just provides some solutions for things that you're like, yeah, we need that. Now, you know, it's got a built-in battery that you can recharge, and yeah, it's convenient to be able to place it down and charge it, but what's more important is that you want to play these games on the big screen. Similar to how the Super Game Boy allowed you to play original Game Boy titles on the Super Nintendo, yeah, the dock enables people to finally be able to play all of these games in high definition on their flat screens. If you're wondering about setup, it's really easy. You plug the dock with an HDMI into your TV and you place the Pocket on the dock. Now, the camera's not going to do justice to how good it looks, but this is full 1080 HD for these original Game Boy games. And if you're wondering about controllers, most of you probably have some console controllers that you can Bluetooth to the dock. But if you really want the retro experience, you might want to check these out. So I just want to take a moment to talk about the 8-bit do or 8-bit do gamepad, which really, this thing is so awesome. Here's the original controller for the Super Nintendo. And as you can see here, it's relatively the same. I mean, almost a one-to-one, but now we have the dual analog controls. And while you could hook up, say, like a PlayStation 5 controller to the Analogue Pocket with Bluetooth, I don't think anything quite connects as fast as the 8-bit do gamepad. So if you're watching this video and you go to their website and want to buy one of these controllers, you'll notice that they don't sell them anymore. And I'm pretty sure maybe they had to make some adjustments because it is such a close, faithful recreation from the original. So unfortunately, you might have to look for these used, but they still make a wide range of different controllers that you can pair up with the Analogue Pocket to get that retro feel. So one of the things to point out with the Analogue Pocket is that it doesn't yet have the customization for when you dock it and plug it into your TV. Now with some of the older devices, you could tweak practically anything you wanted to get it to the right look of the retro game that you were playing. Right now, it's just kind of a plug and play. But I have no doubt that a software patch or something can easily fix this. It's just because the device is so new and we just got it in our hands. So while it was kind of a rush to try and get my hands on the Analogue Pocket, you know, I'm still waiting on the clear case that's designed for it. But because it's so close in scale to the original Game Boy, and cases are still as interesting today as they were then, it fits perfectly in these cases. You know, I think it's kind of cool that you can take the original carrying cases that the Game Boy had and, you know, say, use the Analogue Pocket instead of the Game Boy. Now, you know, I could definitely see going to, you know, work or business meeting with this one, pulling this case out and, you know, instead of the Game Boy, here's the Analogue Pocket, which fits perfectly in its place. No, I don't think I would take this out in public, but it's pretty cool that it fits. So if you're watching this video, there's no doubt that you probably went to Analogue's website, looked for the pre-order, or maybe looked online for what scalpers are selling for, which is unacceptably high, and it's really just taking advantage. But, you know, be patient, have faith. Analogue Pocket will be available. It's a company that's committed to delivering these, and, you know, they're aware of the chip shortage. They're doing everything they can, and, you know, it's easy for me to say because here I am holding one in my hand, and I realize, you know, there's probably a lot of you who are frustrated that you can't get your hands on one yet, but, you know, just keep in mind that as time goes on, it gives them a chance to work on software patches, to iron out the quirks or add new features. And, you know, as every day that goes by, there's going to be more people in the community developing maybe new titles for it. So, you know, there is some silver lining in waiting until you can get yours. But, you know, for now, I hope this video helps and just gives you a closer look at the Analogue Pocket until you can get your own. So if you thought this video was helpful, please like and subscribe, show your support, keep a lookout for the other episodes in this series, and thanks for watching. You know, super frustrating if you can't get your hands on one. Yeah, hang in there, Elijah. Yeah, I think it's Elijah Wood. So he didn't get an Analogue Pocket. Yes, I heard Elijah Wood finally got an Analogue Pocket. You hung in there, buddy. Yeah, he finally grabbed that brass ring. I think that's pretty much it. So I just want to take a quick moment to thank the actual customer who owns these products. Typically in WhyBuy reviews, it's always the customer who owns a product talking about it on screen. But in this special series, there was just such a great collection that we had an opportunity to cover that we didn't want to pass on the opportunity. So working with the customer who owns these products, kind of coaching me and explaining their story and having me sort of retell it was really special. And it not only helped me relive my nostalgia and love for Nintendo and handheld video games, but I really do think that it was a special treat to be able to cover just such a wide range of this collection and deliver something that is not only educational, but just a lot of fun. So thanks for watching, and thank you to everyone who is involved in this and made it possible.